there is a case to be made whether IO games should have a chat. And while for some IO games this is definitely beneficial, some not so much. The original IO games such as Agar.io, Sliverio, Diepio never had a chat, but that was the charm of them. Non-verbal communication was the key to succeed in these games. Or at least some of them. Some IO games like Civivio, rest in peace, and Battledudes.io had emotes to communicate with, which in my opinion still isn't chatting. Although attacking your teammates with your weapons is also a sign of communication for some reason. Then you have games like Temerio and Starvio, although not necessarily required to play the game, is encouraged due to tribes or clans officially being embedded into the game. And although it would be funny to have a clan in-game with no chat whatsoever, in this scenario it is better. So I will give my reasonings as to why a chat in an IO game is either good or bad. Let's start with the good. 1. It's simply just easier. Why chat on Discord or any other app when you can just chat in-game? Unless if you're using a voice chat, which most if not all IO games do not have. But still, it is just much simpler and much easier to interact with players, and it can be very beneficial depending on the game and depending on the player that you encounter. 2. Some IO games actually need it. Take Florio, the recent version. Also take Hordezio. Both of these games need a chat, and whilst you don't necessarily need to chat, these are useful. Hordes in particular has a lot of customizations in regards to the chat and whatever notifications you want to see, which is very useful, and for games like these, they are needed. 3. Fewer distractions. You don't need to switch to another browser or another app just to chat, unless you're that kind of person that has them both picture in picture. But even then you still get distracted and you can still click the wrong app or the wrong browser. One wrong move and you may potentially die in game. You don't want that now, do you? 4. You can turn it off at any time, assuming they have such option. If you cannot turn it off, that can be seen as a disadvantage, but I don't see why an IO game or any game would not have that option. Either way, it is a good way to avoid any spam and toxicity, because there is a whole lot of that in these games. So if for some reason you cannot handle the chat, turning it off might be the best option for you. And number 5, if you are a YouTuber or someone very well known in the game, you can use it to communicate with your fans, and I guess haters as well. So whether or not you see this as an advantage or disadvantage, that is up to you. I would consider it an advantage simply because it is slightly easier to communicate with your fans outside of Discord or voice chat. Now I am going to explain what is bad about a chat in an IO game. Believe it or not, I believe there are a few, because I do believe there are some flaws. So let's begin with number 1, the immersion is ruined. Now what do I mean by this? It is a little difficult to explain without going back to the classic original IO games such as Agar.io. There is something so charming about a game that has no chat whatsoever. A game that takes one click of a button or one click of a keyboard just to enter a game. Something so simple yet so incredibly effective at the time. The idea that you can dominate a game or a server by just using your skills. The idea of you and your teammates dominating team mode with your skills and your coordination. The idea that you spread your love and appreciation by spinning, before spinning to team was a thing, of course. The idea of communicating such as ejected mass, simple things just as this, are what made the game so immersive and so cool to play. A simple in-game chat ruins the immersion, at least for me. But this is what originally made IO games so popular back in the day, so I feel like it is important to note this, even though the conception of an IO game is a lot different nowadays. 2. Lots of spam and lots of toxicity. I imagine this is the most obvious one, because just look at this, and this, and this, and this. This, by the way, is the reason why Diepio and Horacio have no chat. This one is just simply a no-brainer. As much good as you can get out of it, there is just as much bad out of it. whenever you chat with someone. This is of course circumvented with an option to disable chat or block people from the game, assuming that game has accounts. Some of them do. But let's say they don't have that option. How are you going to avoid all of it? You just have to ignore them. But at the same time, should you disable chat just because of a few bad apples that you encounter in-game? I would suggest no, but it is something that we all have to deal with, no matter who you are. 3. It's more of a distraction than you think. Maybe not so much as a different browser or app, but when you're in-game and you have no movement whatsoever, you can easily die, and your session and your run will be completely ruined just because you were chatting. And I know this, because it's almost happened to me a few times. And since I prefer to do as good as possible in-game, I prefer not to chat, because it can be too much of a distraction. 4, although I will stress this is more of an opinion, do they really need to be added in some IO games? Sometimes I feel like a chat has been added for the sake of a chat being added, unless there is some purpose to use them, like in Tamen.io or Florio. Are they really needed for an IO game? I personally do not think so. The game can be just as good without one. 5. Voice chat exists. This is much better for you when you have friends and or fans whom that you play with, because almost nobody who uses voice chats with friends are not going to interact by using in-game chat, at least not as much. And also, unless the game has an in-game voice chat, which most IO games, if not all of them, do not, again, is there really any point of a chat existing in the first place? You decide. Overall, it depends on how you perceive things, because chat is both good and bad depending on how you use it. My own personal opinion on the chat is, I will use it if I absolutely have to. Now, some of you may know this, but I currently am committed to never speaking in 2 games. One of them is Hordzio, and the other is Florio, even though I still have both chats enabled, because both of them are useful. Now, if Ultra and Super notifications never existed in Florio, I would never be using Florio's chat. That's just a fact. I have almost no use for chat in IO games at the very least, because I would rather just play the games, as opposed to being distracted by chat. Also, I like the art of non-verbal communication. Although it is limited, I still want to see how far I can go with it. For other people, however, it is definitely needed, and that's fine. It's easily understandable, and that should be appreciated. Everyone plays differently. What do you think? Do you use chat? Do you not use chat? Do you think I'm right or wrong? Are there any other reasons I missed? Feel free to share, because there will definitely be some reasons I may or may not have missed. That is all.